The Paw Sox Stadium deal crawls through the Senate, but there's a brick wall waiting.
The Dan Yorke State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
Good Friday evening. We've got a lot going on with the Paw Sox Stadium thing, and I know there's almost, I wouldn't say we have a 38 Studios battle fatigue, but it's getting there. I think there are a lot of people who have interest in the future of professional baseball here in the state, but who are pretty weary over the fight that it has become. Be not weary. It is at these times, whether you are for this project or against it, that things get lost and missed. The diligence of the constituents is important on both sides, and I would suggest that I don't think you've been very diligent. I don't think you're paying attention enough to the nuances of this whole thing. My two guests tonight might concur with that theme, although they would suggest to you that there are different nuances that you should be focused on. Good evening. Total Paw Sox conversation this evening. You know, on Friday nights, we record our programs for Friday night on Thursdays. So if anything huge has happened between Thursday afternoon and Friday, we'll catch up on Monday, on MLK Day, of course. Latest headline, as the House Finance Committee passes by an 8-1 vote the new revised Paw Sox legislation. Here's Eyewitness News summary of what happened this week.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
An 8-1 vote in the Senate Finance Committee Tuesday sends the amended Paw Sox bill to the full Senate.
It's an opportunity for Rhode Island to say that we can invest in our future.
Pawtucket Senator and Finance Committee Chairman William Conley pleased with the outcome. His fellow Pawtucket lawmakers and co-sponsors of the bill speaking in favor of the legislation Tuesday night.
I believe that this is a good deal for the state of Rhode Island.
The amended bill released last month tweaks the deal for the $83 million ballpark to be constructed at the former Apex site, asking for additional commitments from the team in exchange for up to $44 million in taxpayer financing. Testimony Tuesday was brief following a series of public hearings this fall.
It's a risk, even if we're lucky and the deal actually does work out.
Some say the investment wouldn't help with declining ticket sales.
I do not think a new stadium subsidized by the taxpayers in Pawtucket is going to bring that back.
Others in favor.
I feel that tonight is the time to bring this to fruition.
The Paw Sox releasing this statement Tuesday saying, "We are pleased with tonight's action by the Senate Finance Committee. We commend Senate President Ruggiero and Chairman Conley for their leadership roles with respect to this enabling legislation for the Pawtucket ballpark bills. Now we await the next step in this process with the vote on the Senate floor on Tuesday, January 16th.
Right, and so my guess is it will pass in the Senate because no leader brings a vote like this to the table unless he's already counted heads. Pat Ford is the chair of the State Libertarian Party and one of the chief arguers against public financing of the stadium in any fashion. And Tony Pires is a longtime state official, was the finance chairman in the House for many years, state representative, is working as the director of administration for the city of Pawtucket and Mayor Don Grebian for a couple more weeks. What, golf? The golf course is well, not this month it ain't.
Going away to Florida a couple of months. I'll come back in April, and whatever assignments they may have for me at that time, I'll take them on.
So you're going to part-time?
Not as a full-time. I'll probably in a consulting capacity.
Well, congratulations
or
on your
volunteer.
On your retirement.
Thank you.
I know you're always working on your game.
Thank
like
you.
we all are. When are you retiring?
Never.
Ever?
Ever. I have 2 college bills to pay.
I know that stress. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Do you both, short answers, let's establish a couple of things that are just procedural. Agree it'll pass the Senate on Tuesday, most likely?
Most likely, yeah.
Most likely?
Yep.
I mean, given the fact that the Senate has already issued talking points, so much for fair debate and open negotiation from the Senate leadership, which are completely biased, I have to tell you, in favor of the project.
But that's your projection, correct? It'll pass the Senate. Also, the House becomes a whole different ballgame. The Speaker has stutter-stepped on this. There's no doubt that he's got his own political worries, political relationship problems, and the impact of the argument that there's so many people against this thing has him bugged, a little freaked out over his opponent, Steve Frias, who fell 86 votes short in the last District 15 rep race, and who is a lead and was in that package, arguer against this thing. You worried about the speaker's
Well, you worry about it. I mean, having been in the
meaning bringing
building,
it to a vote.
having been in the building for 16 years, I understand the process. It's a challenging position being speaker. This is for some, a very difficult concept to understand. He's taken an approach a wait and see approach, and we're prepared to make our case in front of the House.
Well, since we're bringing him up, let's get a reaction. Jess, if you could, Mattiello on the Paw Sox.
Whether it gets a vote on the floor will depend on how the hearing goes and what the public wants. In the House, we're trying to listen very, very closely to the public. We're trying to assess the public will on this, and we're going to reflect the public will and do what the public wants us to do as best that we can understand and read the public's will.
All right, so that's audio that we grabbed from our radio news work this week on WPRO. Have at it. Define the public will.
Well, the public will is very straightforward. The state of Rhode Island nor this country were designed as trading companies on behalf of private corporations. It's been pointed out and sometimes overlooked throughout this conversation as we focus on the rather damning economics of the investment itself, that government has absolutely no role interfering in private business or private markets. And people's sort of casual dismissal of that as some sort of philosophical road bump is wildly inappropriate. Government are stewards of our money temporarily. And the fact that they have the ability to, in a rather confiscatory way, take our money, our property rights at will, is disturbing enough. The fact that they could do so and put our money at risk, this money they are stewards for the sake of a private investment, is disgusting.
Here's the thing. That's a very articulate discussion of your philosophy and your argument against the project, but it didn't go to the question. The question is, what is the public's take on this? You're trying to influence the public. That's your job in this.
The public's take, according to our polls that have been done privately, are that 2/3 of Rhode Islanders, when you explain to them that it's not taxpayer supported, it's not money coming out of Pat's pocket or mine or yours, it's dollars that are being generated as a result of the operation of that club. The state of Rhode Island gets $2.2 million today in income tax and general revenue as a result of general revenue sales taxes as a result of that operation. If I ask you, Dan, do you like liver? You're probably going to tell me no. If I tell you that it's going to add 10 years to your life and 25 percentage points to your children's IQ, you're probably going to say, you know what? That's for me.
Does it, by the way?
It doesn't, but that would be the argument. But when you explain to them that it is not taxpayer dollars, these are revenue monies that are going into the bonds. Pat espouses a libertarian theory that goes back to an agrarian economy back in the colonial days.
And you espouse a theory that goes back to a failed state
so what
over the last
happens
generation.
is we're in 2017. This is now an industrial global economy. Countries fighting countries for new companies to invest there, communities against communities, states against states. It's a competitive environment. And today, the flow of money goes to those states that are aggressive, to those communities that are aggressive. And there's a certain balance that
Mr.
needs
Pires,
to take place.
Your approach is
Pat
reflective of
recognize that.
Mr. Pires, you were an instrumental part of leadership during a period in which Rhode Island faced unprecedented decline, in large part because of this type of failed investment.
And when I came into it, Patrick, let me respond.
No, you've already been talking for a few minutes.
During a period of time after the credit union crisis, I became chairman of the Finance Committee, and he's absolutely right. We made investments in the mall. We made investments in the Masonic Temple that had been closed for 65 years.
Providence taxpayers
and you have an opportunity 20 years later
and what was wrong
to look
with those
to see what
investments,
happens.
Because number one, you interfere with private markets. The state of Rhode Island has displayed no basic competence in doing so whatsoever at any level. The mall, as it starts to empty out as anchor tenants leave, proven to be, a financial neutral for the state? Because how much money of Providence's was given away? How much money is accrued back to the taxpayers? You moved transactions and commerce from one part of the state to the other. Let's look at the convention center. That was a genius investment. How many hundreds of millions of dollars in the hole are we going to be to that when that was an investment portrayed by the state legislature that you represented as this was going to be revenue positive?
Well, you weren't a member of the legislature, first of all, and at no time, I can tell you, and I was not chairman of finance at the time. I was a rank and file. At no time did anyone represent that the convention center would pay for itself within the confines of that wall.
That's absolutely not
true. The
true.
convention center would pay for itself based on increased activity that would come in from out-of-state conventions and ancillary development that would come later on.
And how much are we subsidizing?
So
Build it and pray
that's
they'll
the
come.
misinformation that you've been given and others give. That's not true. And
There's,
it never has been
there's
true.
a big difference between pay for itself in terms of economic return and pay for itself on its own P&L. I don't know a convention center of its kind in the country that has its own profit and loss in
Which
the
is
black.
why state government, but particularly a failed state government like Rhode Island, should not be involved in interfering in private markets. You display no, not you personally, but your organization has displayed no competence. Let's talk about Alpha Beta. Let's talk about Capco Steel. Let's talk about 38 Studios. On and on and on.
Look at the results of those investments.
Yeah, look at the results.
Stand on the lawn of the State House and look at the
highest
Renaissance
poverty
Hotel
rate in
and look at all the developments that take
I'm going
place
to bring
around
this
there.
thing home because there's something that Mr. Pires,
Failure.
something
That's
that
what
Mr.
your symbol
Pires
is.
said, I think, is somewhat misleading. And I think we at least have got to get on a fair definition level on what this investment is, and we'll talk about that when we come back. Stay with us.
I would agree that it's probably 2-to-1 in opposition in my district, but I wouldn't say most of it's from my district. I talked to all of my colleagues. They're all saying exactly the same thing.
Well, the Speaker of the House doing his own reflection on the pulse of Rhode Island. A funny question that we'll answer a little bit later on is, if it is lopsided, why in heaven's name would he even bring it to a hearing in the near future? There's something funky that goes along with that projection. Having said that, Tony Pires is the administrator for the city of Pawtucket, soon to be part-time. Pat runs the Libertarian Party here in the state and is an articulate opponent of the public financing of the stadium. When you suggest there's no taxpayer money, look, I think we've got to be intellectually honest on this stuff. Not that you're trying to mislead, but I just want to make sure that we understand. Just because it's positive cash flow projected doesn't mean that the state and the taxpayers aren't custodians of a significant portion of this investment. And I think what happens is when we say things like no taxpayer money, not true. In fact, the backstop on this is taxpayer money. The structure of lending are taxpayer auspices through the Pawtucket Redevelopment Authority. So I think we got to be careful when we try to minimize the risk by misleading on the definition. Do you agree with me?
I do to a certain extent. In part, we're talking about existing revenue that's coming in, but you're not taking into account additional revenue that will become forthcoming, because economic development is going to bring in new hotel tax revenue, and sales tax.
It is a taxpayer investment or a taxpayer encumbrance that I believe, as you do, is a responsible one. But let's not suggest that we don't have that dynamic.
And if I could approach the whole structure of this. First of all, the notion that this $2.2 million in annual sales tax revenue will simply disappear.
And income tax.
Right, will disappear is nonsense. The economic activity that will be, if in fact the Paw Sox, and we don't want the Paw Sox to leave, but if in fact there was no baseball in Rhode Island, the money is, as most economists, PhD level economists will agree, will be simply spent elsewhere in the economy, which might actually be more to the benefit of Rhode Island taxpayers, because most economists point to professional sports teams as being net negatives to the local economy.
But
in
Pat,
so many levels.
When we quote $2.2 million, we're talking $2.2 million income tax based on the players' salaries, the people in the front office.
The average player's salary is what, about $20,000 a year?
May I
honestly, you've had plenty of time. In fact, you've had the entire resources.
Let me complete.
You've
my
had the
thought.
resources of the state of Rhode Island to beat this to death.
So the general sales tax revenue for the sale of beer and soda and hot
and the money will be
dogs
spent elsewhere,
and
other
bats
restaurants
and balls, etc., will also go elsewhere.
No, it'll go elsewhere within the state of Rhode Island.
That money is not going to be replaced.
We don't know.
That's nonsense.
But here's the thing. We don't know whether the $2.2 million goes away from the economy completely.
Exactly.
We don't know if it moves to the theaters, the movie theaters. We don't know if it goes to Worcester. I'm not so sure that that also is a place you ought to hang your hat on. The idea is the money is absolutely there. the money has shown a track record of being cash flow positive for the deal. The projection is a safe one. I've never worried as a constituent in this thing about losing $2 million of revenue to a $9 billion budget. I've never worried about, so when Pat argues that, I think you ought to give it to him because it's a non-starter. There's a quality of life cultural argument, there's a Pawtucket redevelopment economic argument here that I think supersedes the state's $2 million, $3 million
and that's
take.
and that's what Don Grebian is fighting for. This is a community.
The survival of the city.
This is a community that at one time was an economic engine for the state of Rhode Island. Prior to the textile industry and the metals industry going overseas or going south and retailing going out to the malls. Pawtucket was a vibrant community making the state of Rhode Island a lot of money.
And you're hanging your hat on baseball.
Don Grebian is trying to recreate that by making Pawtucket a destination
He's suggesting
place.
you're hanging your hat on baseball.
I mean, let's look at the hard numbers.
Doesn't matter if it's baseball or a polo field.
Again, government has no place interfering in private markets. That's what you're doing. That's the pathology of the failure of the state of Rhode Island. Generations of doing that, and look at what it's resulted in. Schools that are decrepit, failing roads, failing infrastructure, go on and on and on. You know, there's a legacy here of this type of behavior, and it's pronounced.
We can't walk and chew gum at the same time, have a project like this that pays for
clearly,
itself, and
if you look
fix
at
the
the
roads,
legislature,
and
no.
fix the schools,
No.
and we can't reflect on the International League where the Paw Sox
Well, let's
thrive,
look
where
at the
every
International.
other successful franchise also has
Well,
a public-private
Pat
partnership.
brings up, and by the way, Pat brings up the issue without acknowledging that the state of Rhode Island currently invests in terms of state revenue into its schools $93 million, and in general revenue, distressed community monies to the city of Pawtucket for another 10.
Which are willing to put at risk, by the way.
They're investing $103 million into the city. Why are they doing so? Because we don't have the capacity to tax. We don't have the land mass to do so. Our people are basically, from a dollars and cents standpoint, make less on a per capita annual basis.
So
than
you're going to
others in
tie
the
up the
state.
resources.
So
that
the fact
you're
that
going to tie up those resources with a baseball team.
the fact of the matter is this investment is critical to the infrastructure, and we're not making it just
But listen
for the
to what he
ballpark.
asked. You're going to tie up the resources with a
You're gonna
baseball
tie-
team.
you're
What
taking
resources will the city of Pawtucket have tied up in terms of this investment?
With a declining sport like baseball, ultimately, if the state has to backstop it, let's look at the facts. Lowell Spinners, attendance down. Norwich, Connecticut Tigers, attendance down. Vermont Lake Monsters. These are all single A, double A, and triple A ball teams. In fact,
none of those are AAA ball
no,
teams.
single A, double A, and triple A ball.
Norwich,
I'm going to
Norwich,
I'm going to
Lowell.
include the Paw Sox in this. All right. The only team that's showing any sort of upside in attendance, and I'd love to see the figures on that, is paid versus the mounds of tickets that seem to be appearing all over the state at the end of the season. Was it Green Day? Come on, really? That's your notion of economic development? Look at cities across the country that have done it. Go to Gary, Indiana. You know, go to cities like, for example, I think at one point in time, the folks that you're in collusion with were promoting Columbus, Ohio as a success story. Guess what? The Columbus, Ohio.
Who's in collusion with what?
This whole crew that's come together to generate state. You think it's funny?
Collusion's a power word
because it's untrue.
Well, collusion's a power word. Who's in collusion with? We got a break. We'll find out who's in collusion with who when we come back.
You think it's so funny?
It is.
Paid attendees at those hearings that there were at the state out, the Pawtucket Red Sox.
The show hasn't stopped during the break. Who's colluding with who?
Well, you know, let's define colluding. You've got a concerted effort by the leadership in Pawtucket, whose community, quite frankly, has got a number of issues to be facing other than this. You know, we were treated today to the report that you've got wholesale medical flight out of the city to Providence because of the failure of your hospital. You know, where was the upside? Where was the prediction that perhaps you might need an emergency room, despite the fact that your Pawtucket Fire Department has been tweeting out about it for weeks now?
So where's the collusion there? We're the victims of they decide in a new world order of medical care.
Because your city government, in conjunction with the state government, all right, is trying to put the bums rush on this through the Senate.
What bums rush?
Bums rush? Issue? We don't even have a finished proposal.
We've devoted significant amount of time in attempting to maintain some of the medical services that were otherwise going to go elsewhere.
How did I get to debating the hospital?
Because it shows a failure, all right? You talk about collusion. All you folks are focusing on right now, as far as the public is concerned, this is the most important thing in your world, and it's ridiculous.
The classic obfuscation of the issue. Is
From
that they
a
change-
professional
They
politician.
changed the subject. No, I'm not. I've been out of the legislature for 16 years. I'm
Again,
a private citizen.
Your
I'm proud
legislature
to
is
be
what
one.
created
By
the
the way,
market conditions is states failing.
is professional politician a dirty term?
When it's used to promote private resources, yeah. This is not
And
a
we're
public
going to,
exigent
Dan, we're
resource.
going to fight the fight.
By the way,
in
that
terms-
rhetoric, the one thing you and I agree on, I know, is that you're not a big fan of Donald Trump, right?
No, not at all.
That professional politician rhetoric, ramming that crap home day after day, week after week, month after month, is what got you Donald Trump. Think about it.
Right, and what's going to
Think
get
about
us a stadium is the notion that the city of Pawtucket is hell-bent to subsidize through state backstop dollars and through state bonding at risk to their own taxpayers a private enterprise. It's an entertainment.
Despite Pat's antiquated philosophy that doesn't work in a global economy with the competitiveness
Who's the leader
that we're
of a
faced.
failing community?
Don
You are.
Grevian is attempting to bring this community back to where it was at one time.
All right, let me ask you this. City of Pawtucket, I think,
Throw a baseball team.
hangs on, I don't think it's just the baseball team. You haven't been able to talk much about Hasbro, but I'm sure you're doing what you can to retain that business while it shops. My projection is that the city of Pawtucket is either going to be Disneyland or a junkyard, and I don't know that there's going to be much middle ground. Do you agree?
And our job is to make sure that it's not a junkyard.
Do you agree that,
And there
that
are
you
many
guys are on the
junkyards
premises?
We're
littering
at that
baseball.
point.
There
We're
are
at
as many
that point.
junkyards littering baseball stadiums around this country as there are not.
And the other
Baseball
issue that
stadiums don't provide economic development. They do not provide ancillary development. Baseball stadiums, like casinos, like shopping malls, are insular, self-contained organizations that do not provide an incentive for people to go out and about.
the other
in
issue,
community.
the other issue, Dan, is the fact that
You ever been to Riverwalk in San Antonio? That's the plan in Pawtucket.
look at the
It's
city
pretty-
of Pawtucket.
pretty big
we have
economic
a
development.
commuter rail station coming in on the northwest part of our community. This will be hopefully the ballpark will be our southeastern
Hopefully.
anchor.
Well, you'll either be a bedroom community, Tony, or you're going to be a bedroom dump. I'm not sure.
bet
which.
on Pawtucket.
Build
Yeah,
it.
Put your money
I'm betting on
Pawtucket.
Pawtucket too, not because of the failed leadership, but because of the people who live there and their willingness to see past this.
All right, we got 30 seconds, 15 for each of you. What's going to happen in the next week or two, quickly?
We're going to continue to make our case before the House. I think it'll pass in the Senate. We're going to make a case with the House, with Mattiello, with Speaker Mattiello and the members to try to bring this democratic process with a small d to the forefront.
We're going to continue to educate people on basic fundamental economics and show them that A, government shouldn't be involved in altering private markets, and B, why stadiums simply are not the panacea that Mayor Grevian would like to present them as. They're failures.
And the beat goes on. Pay attention. My final thought with the back. Here's the thing you need to know about the McCoy Stadium situation now. We are already in a public-private partnership. We already are taxpayer custodians of that facility. And the schematic, although a little bit different in the numbers for the Slater Mill proposal, is not all that much different than what we're talking about now. And if I asked you in a poll, given that we're already in a partnership with state and local tax investment in McCoy, should we grow it? I promise you the poll reaction would be much different. You just need to be informed about it, seems to me. But that's just my take. See you on the radio at 3 on Monday on WPR MLK Day. We'll be back that night. Have a great weekend. Go Pats.